That's why we're opposed.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member from Skeena-Balti Valley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to my friend down the way for his speech. And while we have some common ground in disliking this bill, we come at it from different angles. I'm not sure that increasing foreign ownership and control of the airline industry in Canada is actually the silver bullet that maybe some Conservatives hope for, because if what we're hoping for is to have a strong aviation sector in this country, perhaps we need a strategy, as radical as that notion sounds, an actual strategy to build up the jobs and build up the workforce here in this country. And one of the concerns I have with these centres of excellence, which are being dangled out by the government, one wonders what we're training these workers for if at the same time the same government is moving those same jobs overseas. I don't know if they're teaching Spanish at these schools, but it may be a thought from this government. So the sequence of events is this, Madam Speaker, and this is my question for my friend, that we had many criticisms, and we were joined by Liberals in these criticisms at the time, of the Conservative government not enforcing the Act, not enforcing the law that Air Canada must operate under. And I can remember the member from Papineau standing out in front of the House of Commons and in Montreal and in Mississauga and in Winnipeg and saying, if you vote Liberal, they'll uphold the law. There was a little asterisk on that. He didn't mention that in the meantime, when forming government, they would change the law so there'd be nothing to uphold. So, in fact, he wasn't technically lying, Madam Speaker. He wasn't technically lying when he said it would be sunny ways. He just didn't mention the storm clouds that were on the horizon, that the sun was out for a moment, but when push came to shove and Air Canada wanted something that Air Canada has long wanted, and Bombardier wanted something else, the quid pro quo comes up. And now is the so-called seriousness of governing, where the 2,600 families and the jobs that they rely on in Mississauga, in Winnipeg, and in Quebec around Montreal are now to be sacrificed for this grand deal. So my question is this. If the Conservatives were unwilling to enforce the law and the Liberals were simply willing to kill the Act, is it not now at least time for this country to face up to reality and to be truly competitive, actually create the national aviation strategy that workers and Canadians have been calling for so long, rather than these cynical shell games that we see from across the way? Thank you.
Honourable member for Sherwood Park, Port Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And there were many points that the member made, some of which I agree with, some of which I don't. He's quite correct to point out that on this and many other areas, we see the government not following through with commitments they made, not following through with commitments they made to various groups. And we've spoken about the increase in the budget deficit, about the increase in taxes for small business. I could go on and on. Now, a bit of a disagreement here about the issue of foreign ownership, but I'll just say this. If we have to choose between sending jobs out of the country or bringing dollars into the country, I say we're better off bringing dollars into the country than sending jobs out of the country. If we have to choose between one of those two alternatives to try and make Air Canada more competitiveness, I'd rather be bringing business and opportunity and jobs and investment here to Canada. That would be our approach on this side of the House. And certainly one of the other differences between us and the Members' Party is we do believe in the value of the market mechanism. We believe in the value of free markets, generally speaking. But for that to work, there has to be basic conditions of fairness. And there isn't, that basic test of fairness isn't met by this bill, because it's arbitrarily changing the rules midstream to legislate windfall gains for Air Canada at the expense of workers, at the expense of taxpayers. So that's the kind of approach that we need. And the member talked about an aviation strategy. I mean, I think what's important is the action here. And you can package it up and call it whatever you like. But certainly the policies that we advocate, which were competitive tax rates for the aerospace sector as well as for all businesses, that allow people to invest in Canada and allow people to create jobs in Canada, those were the kinds of approaches that were good for the aerospace sector, but also for all business in Canada. So that's what we emphasize, and it's unfortunate to see the government moving away from that suite of policies.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The honourable member for Skeena-Balti Valley.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. A certain question I have that underlies this debate that is yet to be made clear by the Liberal Party itself is that they seem to have established this quid pro quo with Bombardier and Air Canada, and we're wondering who actually benefits from this. So for the cost of these 45 planes, which everybody familiar with the file agrees with are excellent jets that fit the needs of Air Canada. But one has to wonder why the Liberals would so strongly backtrack on a commitment to all those workers, all those maintenance jobs, which, as he rightly says, and many speakers have pointed out, are going to be moved overseas. Because all this bill deals with is just that aspect, is getting Air Canada off the hook for the commitments that they made in law. They're changing the law to make it fit the reality that the Liberals now want because Air Canada asked for it. But the quid pro quo with Bombardier, that perhaps the Quebec government were unsure, is to say that these 45 planes are somehow going to compensate for this, and that there's these now centers of excellence that if you thought were important, would also be enshrined in law. That if the Liberals were absolutely committed to these and could name the number of jobs and how long they'd last for and what they were for, would certainly merit a pen being put to paper, and somewhere in C10, of which there are many pages, they would find the heart and the gumption to actually commit to Canadians that aspect as well. But instead, those are promises off. And we heard that the Liberal member from Winnipeg North long rallied against this, and we all know he can speak and talk and talk and talk. And he chose many of those moments when he rose in this place when in opposition to lay down petitions from his constituents, because he said, I'm doing the work of an MP. I'm doing the good work of a member of Parliament, and he was right, because his constituents were worried that good-paying jobs were about to be shipped overseas because the government was not enforcing the law, a Conservative government at the time. So what was the member from Winnipeg North's solution to this, now that he's in government? Was to change the law so that government wouldn't have to abide by that nasty little thing called the rule of law, and Air Canada could do as they will. The question is this somehow a quid pro quo that works out for anyone, either the taxpayer or the 2,600 workers that are losing their jobs? And not just those workers, Madam Speaker, as you well know, in your constituency and all of our constituencies, good-paying jobs like this don't just affect the person when they lose that job, but their entire family and the spin-off industries that surround that job. Is this somehow a good cost-benefit for Canada? And is this somehow not just the most cynical form of politics that we've come too accustomed to from this party?
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The member asked at the beginning who benefits from this legislation. And I suppose an important connected question to that, given who benefits, who is it that this government is listening to? Discussions with whom are informing their policy choices. And it's very clear who benefits from this legislation and who doesn't. This legislation provides windfall gains for Air Canada owners, and perhaps, depending on the quid pro quo involved, to Bombardier owners, at the expense of workers and at the expense of taxpayers. Madam Speaker, I will say I do appreciate questions from the honourable member, but I think I've been pretty tough on the government, so I would appreciate to hear their response to this. Madam Speaker, what do they have to say for themselves? Do they have questions about the things that we've said? I'd like to hear from the government on this, Madam Speaker. Who do they think benefits, and why are they bringing forward this legislation? Let's hear what they have to say.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for London West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the honourable member for his comments. I want to reiterate that Air Canada will continue to be expected to carry out maintenance activities in Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec. The amendments of this Act recognize that some of Air Canada's aircraft maintenance may take place outside of the limits of those cities in the surrounding provinces and in other provinces. Notably, and we've mentioned this before, the Montreal urban community only covered part of Greater Montreal and no longer exists as a jurisdiction. Also, Air Canada's maintenance activities expand beyond the strict confines of those cities. For example, the carrier has extensive activity throughout the Greater Toronto area beyond Mississauga. So it's obvious that this Act will change only the part that is necessary, that we will continue to expect that they carry out maintenance activities in the three provinces.
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, a very brief answer, please.
Madam Speaker, really, it's unfortunate, bordering on shameful, that the member would present this legislation in this way, because, frankly, the legislation provides no assurance whatsoever that a serious number of jobs will remain in Canada. It uses effective weasel language that gives Air Canada all the flexibility it needs to do exactly what it wants to do. And may I say, Madam Speaker, that if the government actually respected the principle of fairness, they wouldn't be amending this legislation at all. These were clear obligations at the time of privatization. These were things that Air Canada agreed to that informed the share price, and that's why the only fair thing to do is to honor workers and taxpayers, not their crony capitalist friends, and defeat this legislation.